So I build my LUTs in Nuke. And the Nuke manual, literally, if you just read it cover to cover, you'd be a VFX artist. I mean, it just tells you how to do everything.
A lot of people out there, I know for sure, think that a LUT is just, it's almost like an Instagram filter or something. Is that true and is that not true, and why?
Yes and yes.
What is going on, Indie Mogul? My name is Ted, and today I'm here with Jaron Presant, ASC. Jaron just came off shooting the show Daybreak on Netflix. He's also the DP behind movies such as Rampage and has worked on teams for things like Star Wars and Looper. And today we're going to talk about something that you guys have asked for, something that I think is a little technical. We're going to talk about the image design process, walk through it, how an actual professional crafts images from pre-production all the way to post-production. And we're actually going to walk through a couple of those steps using Daybreak as footage in the actual example. So, Jaron, what is the image pipeline?
The image pipeline is everything that we do with an image from the moment when we capture it all the way through when we present it.
Gotcha.
So through to delivery.
So you're saying that there's far more to this other than just shoot, color, export.
It's overly simplified to say we shoot, we color, we export.
Yeah.
There's a lot of steps within color that affect everything that we're doing all the way up to and including what we're doing on set in many ways, and anticipating those steps is important to the shooting itself. In a digital pipeline, everything can be adjusted, and it can and will be adjusted. And if you don't take control as a cinematographer, someone else will. The image processing downstream is by far more impactful than any camera you can choose to shoot on.
And what's the reason for that? Are you saying that a lot of cameras at this point, what the quality that they're capable of shooting for is fairly similar to a degree now?
When we're talking about professional cameras, they're all capturing enough data. The question is, what are you doing with that data, and how are you prepping that data for display in the final presentation? With every new technology, there's more control gained in the post pipeline, and that greater amount of control affects the image and what you can do with that image, which affects then what we do on set. On a beginning level, people don't view this stage as that important. It's a step that will come later and we'll deal with it later. But as you get more advanced in imaging, it becomes earlier and earlier and earlier. And you understand that the effects, what we're doing on set, are intimately woven with the choices we're making for the future in this post-process.
Gotcha. Well, there's a lot of filmmakers out here that I know want to start shooting bigger things, and at least want to start thinking in the right way to be able to understand the image pipeline. So, ready to jump into this?
Yeah.
Let's do this. Image pipeline. Okay. Now we are in FotoKem's Keep Me Posted facility, and we're here with Aidan Stanford, the colorist behind films such as Get Out, Knives Out, and most recently, of course, Daybreak, which we're going to be talking about here in the studio. So we're going to jump into a little bit about the image design process and actually look at a little bit of the footage and actually walk through some of the nodes and what was actually done to make the kind of stylized look that the actual show had. So you guys ready to do this?
Yep.
Let's do this. So for Daybreak, Jaron, what were you guys shooting on, and how early was Aidan in on the process?
So we shot on the Alexa LF with Primo primes. They were expanded to cover the sensor.
Yep.
And one of the things, because we knew we were creating such a strong look, we brought Aidan in very, very early in relative to the whole color process.
We were discussing looks and things we want to do and kind of highlight, and then I was creating stills, emailing them to him, discussing, and we did a lot of that kind of conceptual stuff early on.
Starting off in the image design process, what's the first step?
So the first stage is concepting, and it's where we're going to conceive of what it is our goals are. You know, what are we trying to hit? What kind of camera movement are we doing? What kind of lighting are we doing? What's the color scheme? What's the world that we live in? Every element that's going to be a part of the cinematography comes from this first stage, right? In the concepting, Brad Payton, the director, said, you know, the end result of the apocalypse is that the world looks like this perfect sunset. Like, it always feels like this sunset glow, but the skies are blue, you know? So it's like, it's kind of like, in some ways, this like kind of perfection of a day. From that stage, we start getting into development, where we start building upon those ideas, right? And in the development is where you build out the LUT for the show, which will create the complex transforms that carry the image to display. On Daybreak, for example, there is a base show LUT that everything goes through. And everything is taken through that LUT, set up for Dolby Vision in this case. So it's a HDR. To me, a LUT is not just a color correction.
Yes.
You know, that's not the intention of a LUT. You can color correct anything, intention of a LUT is a base transform that takes your footage and preps it for a display and creates the base of your look. But it's something that can be applied to a bunch of stuff. Because it's not like just swing the knobs and then you've got a look and then you go bake it out to a LUT.
Yes.
Because you can do that.
Yes.
But that philosophically, to me, that's not what the purpose of a LUT is.
A LUT is not a color grade. You don't just
It's not just a random color grade.
you don't just tweak something in, copy pasta on everything. Yeah.
Best example is like you can create a color grade where you're doing secondaries and keys, and then you can bake it out to a LUT. It'll look like crap on on most stuff other than that shot. I mean, one thing that I do with every LUT that I make is I look at it on a ton of images, so that just to that's part of like the check phase, is to make sure that it's doing predictable things on a lot of images.
So after you create this kind of base LUT that you're going to be using on your show, you go through and you test different scenarios, and they're almost things that you kind of have on your belt of, if I'm in this scenario and I shoot this way, I know that it's going to work.
Daytime light, this works in this works in that. You know, what are all sorts of different types of lighting environments, and can I just check it and make sure that I'm not getting something that's like, wow, that is
not what I intended
at all
with this.
Right?
Are there any other big pitfalls that people have when they're trying to create a base LUT?
If you start pulling on, in different ways on an image, you can sometimes run into a tearing on the image. You can have pixels where they're very close together, but they get pulled very far apart in different directions. And you can create just little artifacts. But that's also surmountable by checking it against a bunch of images. On the post-apocalypse side, there is this very strong Mad Max vibe to all of the imagery. So that has upstream of the show LUT a transform that adds all of that warmth into the image. But beyond just warming it up, it's doing a really very complex transform on the color cube. The color cube was desaturated in green and magenta, and then increased in saturation in orange and blue. So it added in all of that kind of color complexity. But we also know we're going to also add in blue skies, because a LUT, though very complex, cannot know where the pixel is in the frame. It just does the same thing to every pixel that has that code value. So we know that we're going to need an additional step to bring back blue in skies and to isolate spatial elements. So I build my LUTs in Nuke, right? And Nuke has a non-commercial version that's free. It doesn't have certain things, like you can't generate a LUT in the free version, but you can learn so much in that. And the Nuke manual, literally, if you just read it cover to cover, you'd be a VFX artist. I mean, it just tells you how to do everything. And it's all there, just sitting, waiting. I mean, there is so much you can do with $0 output, just in terms of learning.
And DaVinci Resolve, of course, being
for sure
entirely free.
Yeah, and I think Red and Airy, I think a lot of places offer great footage too. You can load in your own, log images and some LUTs or whatever and practice.
Now, before we move on, I want to talk to you about Squarespace, who's honestly going to be your next best friend when it comes to building any kind of following or audience. Now, in a lot of our interviews with a lot of different filmmakers, a lot of them talk about how important social media is to their growth. The problem, though, is that today, there are so many platforms to point people towards. You've got your Twitter, your Facebook, your Instagram, your production company's Instagram, your artsy photography Flickr, you've got your Vimeo, you get the idea. But let me just tell you real quick that Squarespace actually has a super handy feature that lets you link and connect all of those accounts into just one page with the click of a button. And for us, we actually do this ourselves. We have all of our social media pages linked at the top, so people don't have to dig through Google searches just to find out what we're doing. And then really, after that, all you have to do is just choose from over 200 top-level domains that work for you. And this is the really first step for putting your name out there. And you can start today by going with a 14-day free trial if you type in squarespace.com/IndieMogul, which is also going to give you 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. Now, you can find the link for that in the description down below, but thank you again to Squarespace for sponsoring this episode. And now, back to the episode.
Once you've developed all of the steps that you're going to go through, you're also at the same time developing lighting plans and camera plans. You're then going to go into implementation, and you're going to apply all of the stuff that you've developed. And that's when you shoot, right? It's our on-set lighting. It's our on-set camera work, our dailies color correction. There are different philosophies for how people shoot. Some people like to shoot with on-set color correction, which is where they have a DIT color the image
Understood. Yeah.
while they're on set. During this implementation process, you're also shooting with the plan of what you're going to do, even if you're not doing it during dailies, right?
Yeah.
So, for example, on Daybreak, we weren't putting all the blue skies back in,
Yeah.
but we knew we were going to.
Yes.
So we knew in framing, we knew in terms of what we were shooting and how we were going to shoot it,
How you lit it
how
and
we
shot
lit
it.
it,
Yes.
how we framed it. If there were certain shots where we're like, oh, we should really look at that, I'd pop it on my computer and I would just do a
pop it in
finish,
just to see
do
it.
a little final pass on it.
Gotcha.
Show it all around, and everybody's like, great, you know.
Gotcha.
Then after that step, now you have an image, and now you go into finalization where you enact all of those plans that you set up.
Mm-hmm.
And to your question of what else is there, that's the point where you start doing matching, you start doing finesse work, you start doing other additional transforms.
Everything that you planned.
Everything that you planned. And because you have planned it well in advance,
Yes.
you shot with that plan. All the intention is in the photography. So the finalization stage is actually quite simple and straightforward because you've prepped for it. For example, in Daybreak, we also did grain. We also did halation.
Yeah.
You add in
Multiple layers.
everything else that starts to make the image the final piece that you were planning on building from the beginning.
Also, where you're working upstream and versus downstream of which thing you've done is very important, because if you're just flailing away and adding nodes, you can paint yourself into a corner and get in trouble.
One thing that we kind of keep referencing, which I think a lot of times people don't think about, is which side of the LUT are you doing correction on, right? And generally speaking, like all of the correction we do is upstream of the LUT. So you create the LUT, you're looking at that first, but everything that you work on is upstream of the LUT on the log image. So you've got a log image, you're going through color correction and everything else, and then it goes through the LUT as the last step.
These are the power windows for how you
you'll
brought the sky
see,
back.
You'll see the window there. So the key is inside.
Like one of the things that really makes convincing windowed corrections is that they work the way that nature works. So with skies, they aren't perfectly horizontal, and they have asymmetry and they fall off.
We kind of tried to make this layer of Glendale that had kind of a neutrally warm, almost smoggy layer.
Yeah.
And then it was like the sky kind of finished at the top. So you'll never see in this show where the blue sky comes right down to the earth. I think that's also what makes it look really great.
And this is what you were talking about adding kind of a spatial awareness to the coloring.
Absolutely. Now in the current entertainment environment, we also have multiple deliverables, and the deliverables are not straightforward anymore.
For people that don't know, when they export out one file, that's not enough.
So it depends on what your project is, right? One export is enough for if you're only going
Doing
to
a
a
short
film
film or
festival
something
and
like
there
that.
it goes, and they
Yeah.
want a quick time and one, boom, boom, you're done.
Yeah.
But if you're doing a project for a commercial release, you may have an IMAX output, you may have a Dolby Cinema output, you may have an SDR, an HDR, you may have a Dolby Vision pass, an HDR10 pass. There's so many passes, and each one has nuance elements.
What about for indie filmmakers? Do they still have to worry about this kind of
So
thing?
you do, in some respect, one of the big ones is HDR, right?
Yeah.
In the past, everything was in standard dynamic range. Now you have this option for high dynamic range. How the image is prepped for that can very much impact how the image looks.
So for normal people that go home and sit on a laptop and watch something on Netflix like this, for instance, they will play the HDR version of the deliverable to them.
So yeah, I mean, like an iPhone is Dolby Vision enabled now. It's going to send it whatever the flag for whatever nit value it can actually create.
Yeah.
We have to usually master in 100 nit, 600 or 1000. So they all go out, all different versions for all different HDR Dolby Vision displays.
Standard dynamic range is 100 nits.
Yes.
Right? We haven't had monitors that were 100 nits for a while. Now we're getting monitors that are 600 nits.
Literally
that
6
are
times as bright.
1,000 nits.
Literally 10 times as bright.
Just because you have a bright contrasting monitor doesn't mean you need to slam everyone in the eyeballs with like the brightest image possible.
Yeah.
And this is the thing that we as artists are up against, is that you do need some artistry to go into how you want that image to be presented.
Yeah.
On Daybreak, we have really specular highlights punched through to 250. So we have an image that feels correct, and specular highlights like the sun punch through and get really bright. But if I look at the image, it's the same image, whether it's on SDR or on HDR. It feels the same. I'm not creating images to show on a TV set to vivid mode with motion smoothing.
Yeah.
I just can't. I'm sorry. It's just not my thing. But I am going to make the best image I can for someone who's got a monitor that's set up correctly for their environment and they're trying to watch something beautiful.
For people that want to start thinking about the image pipeline and actually start thinking about the design process in the way that professionals do, what's kind of the last takeaway piece of advice that they need to know?
The biggest takeaway is don't be intimidated. Don't feel threatened by it. It's just some steps. Just take a step forward, right? Here's a great example.
Yeah.
Okay, you have a DSLR. You're shooting with it, and you shoot with it in standard mode. Try shifting it to low contrast mode. Right? Okay, something with low contrast, whether it's a log, nod, and then take the image into Resolve and then bring back the contrast and start playing with what that looks like. And then play with what happens when you shift the colors off in different parts of that image.
I work on Resolve, so it's node-based. And I think just understanding order of operation, how this thing affects that thing. If I do this before that, how will that change the end result?
Yeah.
Figure out the basics of what you're doing before you just start trying to do all the advanced stuff.
Once you start taking little steps, you'll start asking more questions, and then you'll get a little further. And it'll all inform back into the portion of what you're shooting and how you're shooting.
Start testing, start playing things, just take one little step.
Just one step.
Okay, well, Jaron, thank you so much for joining us and for breaking this down. I know this is kind of immensely technical. If there are people that have questions, can they bug you online?
For sure.
Cool, JaronPresant.com. You can ask some questions, of course. Again, thank you to Squarespace for sponsoring this video. Start by putting your brand out there by going over to squarespace.com/IndieMogul for 10% off your purchase of a website or domain.
And make sure you head on over to get the full uncut podcast discussion with our awesome friend Jaron, what we will also put in the description down below.
But thank you so much for joining us again.
Absolutely.
Seriously, it's the best to be able to walk through this.
Pleasure.
Andy Muggle, thanks so much for watching. And of course, we'll catch you guys next time.
Guys, you guys remember
that. Welcome to
Hello,
Movie Phone.
and welcome to Movie Phone. For new releases, press 1. For genres, press 2.